The odds of winning the lottery are almost impossible, 1 in over 300 million. But despite those odds, millions still dream because what if? What if this one ticket is the key to freedom, the end of worry? For 47-year-old Billie Bob Harrell Jr., a soft-spoken, church-going Texan, that dream came true one summer evening in 1997. But what should have been the greatest blessing of his life soon became a curse that would destroy everything he held dear. Billie Bob was kind-hearted, dependable, and deeply spiritual. From an early age, he admired the preachers in his family and thought he might one day become one himself. But life had other plans. After high school, he joined the U.S. Marines, serving his country before returning home to Texas. There, he married his sweetheart, Barbara Jean, and together they had 3 children. They weren't wealthy, far from it. Billie Bob worked various blue-collar jobs to make ends meet, stocking shelves, repairing equipment, doing whatever honest work he could find. Barbara stayed home for years to raise the children, but when times got tough, she took on work too. By the mid-90s, the Harrells were struggling. The bills piled up, and each paycheck seemed to vanish faster than the last. But through it all, Billie Bob kept his faith in one simple ritual. Every week, without fail, he'd buy a few lottery tickets. June 28, 1997, started like any other day. Billie Bob was lounging at home when he opened the newspaper and froze. There, in the list of winning Texas lottery numbers, were his numbers. At first, he thought it had to be a mistake. He checked again, then again. His hands trembled as he called his wife, Barbara Jean, into the room. "Tell me I'm not crazy," he said, voice shaking. She looked, then she screamed. They had just won $31 million. After years of scraping by, of watching his children go without, of praying for a break, it was finally here. Billie Bob fell to his knees, tears in his eyes. He said it wasn't luck. It was divine intervention. This, he told friends later, was a gift from God. The Harrells drove to Austin a month later to collect their first check. The payout would come in annual installments, $1.24 million a year for 25 years. For most people, it would be more than enough to guarantee comfort and security. And for a while, it was magical. Billie Bob quit his shelf-stocking job. He bought new houses for his family, cars for his kids, and took everyone on a vacation to Hawaii. He donated large sums to his church, handed out turkeys to poor families during the holidays, and helped friends pay off debts. He'd been poor before, and he couldn't stand the thought of anyone else going through what he had. His generosity seemed endless, but soon, word spread across town. The local preacher told his congregation that one of their own had won millions, a humble man of faith. Suddenly, Billie Bob's phone rang constantly. Old acquaintances reappeared. Strangers sent letters, showed up at his house, and even waited outside his church. Everyone wanted something, and Billie Bob couldn't say no. Barbara Jean watched helplessly as her husband's generosity spiraled out of control. He gave away money left and right, tens of thousands at a time. He wrote checks for church members, covered friends' mortgages, and made donations that no one had even asked for. "God blessed us," he'd say when she objected. "We have to bless others." But their marriage began to strain under the weight of it all. They argued about money, about boundaries, about the people constantly showing up at their door. Within 8 months of winning the lottery, Barbara Jean had reached her breaking point. In early 1998, she filed for divorce. Billie Bob was crushed. He'd gone from struggling but happy to rich and lonely in less than a year. The woman who had stood beside him through decades of hardship was gone, and so was half his fortune. Barbara Jean took her share of the winnings, and Billie Bob moved into a modest home on his own. The emptiness crept in fast. Billie Bob's life began to unravel. The calls for money never stopped, and he kept giving. His first $1 million installment was gone within months, and when the next one came, the same thing happened again. He grew desperate. In 1999, he made a risky deal with a finance company. He agreed to sell 10 years' worth of his future lottery payments, valued at around $6.2 million, in exchange for an upfront cash payment of $2.25 million. It was a terrible trade, but he didn't see another way out. His spending habits, generosity, and poor investments had left him in debt. The lump sum seemed like a lifeline, but the money didn't solve anything. His attempts to reconcile with Barbara Jean failed. She agreed to have family dinners with him for the sake of their children, but nothing more. He told friends and his financial advisor that winning the lottery had been the worst thing that ever happened to him. The blessing he'd prayed for had turned into a curse he couldn't escape. By the spring of 1999, Billie Bob Harrell Jr. was a shell of the man he once was. Friends said he seemed restless and withdrawn. He rarely smiled. On May 22, 1999, he had dinner with his family, one of the few moments of peace he'd managed in months. He laughed a little, hugged his kids, and said goodbye. That night, back at home, Billie Bob locked himself in his bedroom. He wrote several notes, one to his ex-wife, one to his children, and one to his financial advisor. Then, with his world collapsing around him, Billie Bob took his own life. He was just 50 years old. News of his death shocked the community. In the days that followed, more tragic irony unfolded. The family he'd tried so hard to help fell into legal battles over what remained of the fortune. There were debts, taxes, and disputes. It turned out there may not have even been enough money left to pay the estate tax. The dream of endless wealth had evaporated, leaving only pain, bitterness, and grief. Billie Bob's tragedy is far from unique. Psychologists call it the lottery curse, a pattern where sudden massive wealth destroys lives instead of improving them. Winners often face isolation, depression, and pressure from friends, family, and strangers. Many go bankrupt within a few years. The change happens too fast, too dramatically. People lose themselves trying to handle what they were never prepared for. Today, Billie Bob Harrell's story stands as one of the most haunting reminders of the saying, "Money can't buy happiness." If you found this story powerful, take a moment to share it. Not for the shock value, but as a reminder that not all that glitters is gold. And if you ever feel like you're chasing something to fill a void, stop and ask yourself what truly brings you peace. Because that's the real jackpot. As always, stay curious and stay safe.